Hello to my 429 subscribers. Thank you for engaging with my content. Now, on my last video, I talked about or I shared some symptoms of survival mode. I was asked the question, how do you enter survival mode? Like, how does that cycle start? From my experience and from the reading that I have done, survival mode is most times, turned on from childhood. You enter survival mode as a child. And as we've discussed, for those of us who don't know, survival mode is basically when you stay in survival instinct too long for a prolonged period. So it goes from just an instinct momentarily to a mode which is long term and consistent. Survival instinct is meant to be used temporarily. So it gives you insight or a certain ability for the short term. How do you enter survival mode, or what causes someone to move into survival mode or prolonged survival mode and stay there? The baseline of that, the baseline cause of that is lack of safety. So if as a child your environment is not safe, you don't feel safe, you're not supported, you basically have to be navigating your surrounding and the people in it. So let's say, for example, you live with someone or your parents or whatever, and you basically now take on the emotional responsibility of the family to avoid certain things. Let's say your parent is short tempered, or they are just overwhelmed, or just emotionally drained and stressed. And you, because children are very smart and they pick up on things easily, and you have observed or you've learned that your parent gets triggered or loud or abusive when a certain thing happens or things happen in a particular way. So, what happens in a situation like that now is that you observe and you learn what not to do, what not to do to avoid your parent or your guardian from going into that particular mode, which should not be your responsibility because you're just a child. The parent should be able to navigate or manage or what do you call regulate their own emotions. The child shouldn't have to tiptoe around the parent. Child should be allowed to be a child in the purest form of childhood. The child should be allowed to enjoy their childhood freely, to freely make mistakes, knowing that it's just a mistake. Mistakes were meant to be made, and that's how you learn. Instead of when you make a mistake, you are made to feel like you are the spawn of you're the spawn of the devil. You're made to feel like how dare you, and then the comparison starts, and you're just like your papa or your mama or your this or your that or whatever the case may be. So what the child now starts to do is they become hyper vigilant, hypersensitive, and so now they start as best as they can try to avoid doing the things that they have now picked up or realized that triggers the parent. And so now you that's what you call survival mode. It's anything or any habit that you develop in an environment in order to keep yourself safe, to keep yourself alive for the moment, basically. Because in a healthy environment, in a healthy household, a child is supposed to make mistake. A child is supposed to be a child. A child is supposed to touch things. A child is supposed to be curious and be allowed to explore their environment without feeling like they're evil spawn. Yeah. So once you enter that and you learn that skill, and you now think that it becomes your personality, becomes who you are. So you grow with that mindset that, oh, so you start before anything else, you're socializing and you start to identify in people what makes them upset, what triggers them. And so now you don't do those things, and you take on that identity, and that you turn that into a personality trait when it's not really a personality trait. It was a symptom of your survival mode environment. And so now you find that every space you go into, you take on that posture. You stay quiet, you don't speak, or the reverse of that is that you perform. You perform. Like a perfect example of this, and he was able to turn it into success for a while. But then now, in his later years, is when he really realized that that was not, he wasn't doing that for him, he was doing it for other people. And this is, what's his name? Jim Carrey. And if you watch his story or listen to his story or listen to any of his interviews where he talks about as a child, he had to perform in his family. So he became a performer because he wanted the people around him to laugh. I think it was his mother. He wanted to make her laugh or whatnot. So he became a performer. He took on the identity of a performer. It paid off for him, but on the back end, he was not happy. He basically sacrificed who he really was at his core to achieve and to become that person. And some of us will say, but it paid off. Yes, it paid off financially. But how is he doing otherwise? How is he doing when nobody's around? How is he doing with, relationships, important relationships in his life? And just like you have high performing drug addicts, you also have high performing people who are living in survival mode, and they still manage to perform and do their daily life just the same. And on the outside, it looks like they're doing well, but I guarantee you that on the inside, when they're alone with their thoughts and with themselves, it's a very different person altogether. So that's just one example. And also, to me, one of the most common examples of how you engage in survival mode, how that happens from childhood. So, survival mode is necessary. Survival instinct is necessary. Survival mode, not so much. Survival mode is when you've stayed in survival instinct for too long, for prolonged period. And survival instinct was necessary for our ancestors, but not us in this 21st century. Not us. And so you can see how growing up in a chaotic, unsafe environment can be likened to our ancestors when they grew up in the wild, when it was unpredictable. Anything can happen at any moment. There's no consistency, there's no predictability, there's nothing. So your nervous system is always on edge, always vigilant, always looking out for the next danger. And that is what happens for those persons, for those of us who grew up in a chaotic, loud, unpredictable environment where there's always something happening. Any minute now, just something can go wrong, something, so you have to either be quiet or you have to perform, to from one extreme to the next. Yeah. So that's it. That's how you engage your survival mode.